It's very interesting how there's this huge dissonance between the general gaming community and myself. I am always right, and the normies are always wrong. And we see this play out time and time again, over and over and over again, in all sorts of different ways, shapes, and forms. And it's not really possible for me to take note of everything that's going on and everything that's happening. Because, I said that Pokopia was going to be a huge success, okay? I correctly predicted that. I knew it was going to be big. As early as, the initial launch trailer, I was saying that. While everyone else was throwing up their hands, like Pokemon is doomed. Okay? They were doing this over and over again. Like, Pokemon is doomed, they're finished. Now they're doing this weird thing where they're pretending Pokemon Gen 10 was delayed, and that's somehow going to sabotage the Switch 2. Spoiler alert, it was not delayed, and it is not going to sabotage the Switch 2. But, again, this kind of situation kind of leads into new situations, right? Things that were pretty obvious to me, but are pretty shocking for the normies. And right now, that is the growing realization among everyone that Pokemon Pokopia is outperforming Resident Evil Requiem critically and commercially. And this is something that nobody saw coming because everyone was doing the typical AAA Resident Evil hype cycle where they just hype this up as the greatest thing ever, only for it to be completely forgotten by the next time the next game comes out, right? Requiem was going through the typical AAA hype cycle. The only difference being that this was launching day and date on Nintendo Switch 2. So Requiem was going through all these phases, all this hype, all this attention, all this worship. I noticed it, other people noticed it. It was very, very clear to me that Resident Evil Requiem was not going to live up to the hype. And now that it's out, and people are playing it, it's very self-apparent just how bad the fan service is, just how bad the second half is, how bad Leon is, how bad some of the retcons are. There are all these problems with Resident Evil Requiem, and meanwhile, Pokopia is looking like it's going to be this game that people play for hundreds of hours. So, obviously, Pokopia is better. Obviously, Pokemon hit it out of the park with this game. But the overwhelming narrative among the general gaming community is that Resident Evil Requiem has to be better because it's more realistic and it has zombies and guns, essentially. That's basically what this is amounting to. Why people are confused about this and why people are still doing this, song and dance that they're acting as if Pokemon is a failing brand while games like Resident Evil and Street Fighter 6 are on the peak of the game. The narrative is these major AAA games that feature balls and guns are the peak of the industry, that they sell the most, that they're the most culturally relevant, they have the most widespread appeal, and it's getting to the point where that's becoming more and more obvious that isn't fucking true. Because plenty of Nintendo games outperform the annual sports titles. Pokemon is bigger than GTA, and something like Resident Evil Requiem is comparatively niche to Pokemon. And this should be very self-evident to anybody who has studied the market at all. But because of the way that the industry has been set up, because of how Resident Evil fans behave and act, because of industry culture, there's this mindset that Resident Evil is this franchise that has a lot more credibility than Pokemon, when in actuality, Pokemon is one of the biggest brands in the world, okay? Pokemon is the biggest video game property in the world now, and we're still pretending that something like Resident Evil can compare to it, okay? We're still pretending as if Resident Evil is as relevant as Pokemon. This is something that really should have been apparent, going into this. Of course Pokemon is going to outperform Requiem. Of course Pokemon's a bigger brand. Of course this is going to do better. But, the overwhelming consensus, during launch week of Resident Evil Requiem was that this was going to be Game of the Year and that this was going to be, some game-changer game for Switch. And it's honestly, having finished Requiem, I don't even think this is going to make my top 10. Honestly. There are so many other games that are coming out this year that are so much better than Requiem. It's not even something I want to recommend to people anymore. I am going to come out here right now and say, go out and buy Pokopia instead. Why exactly would you ever buy Resident Evil Requiem? It doesn't make any sense. And it's something that we really do need to spell out for everyone, that Requiem is a very, very good example of how something is getting a lot of attention and hype purely because of the brand and like their perceived legacy among normies. And you seriously have people believe that Resident Evil is like even a tenth as relevant as Pokemon, which is just completely laughable. Like, it's really something that we really do have to spell out for everyone at just how bad the difference is between these two franchises. And it's not what the industry thinks. Like, the industry is surprised by this. You know, general gaming YouTubers are surprised that the Pokemon game is outperforming the Resident Evil game. But, like, if you're not a complete retard, like, this should be pretty self-evident. Like, again, we're at the point now where random Pokemon spin-offs made by a different company are outperforming, like, Capcom's most profitable franchise. You know, that's how big of a deal Pokemon is. And we really do have to address it. That this isn't some, like, passing fad anymore. You know, this isn't, you can't just say that, like, Pokemon died back in the 90s. Only the first generation mattered. Like, first of all, that was never true. And second of all, like, the series is 30 years old now. So even if there was this, like, overwhelming consensus that, like, Pokemon stopped being good after Gen 1, like, you know, it bounced back and now it's bigger than ever. You know, even if that was true, like, again, this should be pretty self-evident. But people want to pretend Pokemon is just this nostalgia brand and that it's only coasting off of nostalgia for, like, the 90s. When in actuality, I think it's more apparent that Resident Evil fits the billing more as a nostalgia brand, because like people aren't talking about like the story or like what Requiem does creatively or the mechanics or anything. Nah, they're talking about like Raccoon City. They're talking about Leon. They're talking about like, you know, weird fan base stuff. Like, Resident Evil is a nostalgia brand. Like, this is what a nostalgia brand looks like, is when it is more concerned with what was successful in the past than actually innovating and doing something new and interesting in the future, right? That's why Resident Evil has stagnated. It has become a nostalgia baby brand. And what's worse is that the fans can't bring themselves to accept it, because accepting that Resident Evil fell off would be accepting that one of the most relevant PlayStation IPs in history, first of all, like, bent the knee and released on Nintendo consoles, but also just has not had the staying power as Pokemon. A brand that we have been told for 30 years was going to be, like, the most successful brand of all time. Like, the biggest fad ever, you know, like South Park even made a video about it, you know, like, our parents are going to be into Pokemon and then we're going to stop caring because we're rebels. And yeah, we couldn't possibly enjoy Pokemon because it's good, because we enjoy it. No, it's entirely just because it's a fad. Again, this is them projected. Okay, this is the reality of the Resident Evil fan base, and the thing that like we really do need to address and talk about is that like everything they say about Pokemon can be applied more so to all of their favorite franchises. Like, the simple fact of the matter is Pokemon is a better run brand than anything else in the industry right now, and I'm very, very tired of pretending it isn't.